So thank you everybody for turning up. As I say, I mean it is a really good crowd. It's great to see some new faces and some friends and allies. My name is Kim Darrington and I am the Director of Market Ops and Transformation at the IUA. So we have, with the help of this lovely panel up here, put this presentation together for you today. It's a continuation of the LMG's Wise Standards campaign, which you may have seen before summer. And we're going to dig a bit deeper into the data standards that are available in the market, how they have come about, what the London market specifically is doing in order to understand the data that it needs to trade. And we're touching on also the practical use of those standards with some case studies from the lovely people at Ruschlikon. I do have some housekeeping, which apparently I see my P45 are not doing, so getting that out of the way quickly. The gentlemen's toilets are that way and through the door. The ladies are this way and through the door. There are no planned fire alarm tests, so if you hear ringing, maybe turn your headphones down on commute. But if you hear ringing and see people in high-vis vests, then please do allow them to escort you out of the building safely. One further point is that we are recording the session because we want it to be available for reference later on. There will be, after the presentations, we've allowed half an hour, but obviously that's probably going to flex a bit for Q&A. We have prepared some panel questions. I would much prefer not to have to use them. So please do have a think about, anything that you'd like to quiz our panel on. But know that you will be recorded whilst you're doing that. If you have any questions which you would like to ask in a more private fashion, there is a networking lunch and panel members won't forgive me for saying this, but I will duck out quickly before they tell me off. But they will all be available to help and answer your questions in a more private fashion over lunch. So, moving swiftly on and getting into the experts and away from the bit part, I'm going to hand over to Clarissa from ACORD, who's going to pick us.
I think this was your slide, Kim. I can do it. For those that don't know me, my name is Clarissa Montecillo. I'm head of GRLC here at ACORD. Kim's already introduced herself. The rest of our panel and speakers consists of Tim Pledger from Swiss Re. He's been a long-time advocate of Ruschlikon and electronic placing and accounting and claims. He's been involved for a number of years, so you couldn't get more of an expert than Tim. Kirstin Duffield, who is here in her capacity as technical advisor to the chair of the London Market Data Council. And she'll be running you through the Data Council work as well as an update on the CDR. And we've got Emma Clark, sorry, Emma, from Liberty, and Terry, Gallagher's, right? From Gallagher's. Emma and Terry have been co-chairing the Ruschlikon implementation group here in London for pretty much the extent of its running. And they've also been really, really heavily involved in all of the Ruschlikon activities, as well as implementations within their own firms. So very, very, we have a panel of people who understand this work very well. So decent intro to everybody.
Thank you.
That's okay. Why data standards and why is it important? Clarity, consistency, and confidence. And to run you through this, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about me. If you hadn't already guessed, I am Australian. So you may have picked it up from the accent, maybe not. I lived in the UK and have done so for 20 years, but I was born and raised in Australia to immigrant parents and raised on American television. So I'm a bit of a mixed bag of accents. And it's growing up, it created some interesting conversations, but you can interpret and determine intent on a face-to-face basis. So the way my dad would pronounce some words were mortifying growing up, but now quite endearing. But there is kind of something about on a face-to-face interaction, you can in real time interpret intent. As we move into a digital marketplace, that ability to interpret based on context, background, etc., that kind of isn't there anymore because computers, and AI included, needs information to determine context. And if that isn't there, then that interpretation is likely to be flawed. So clarity, consistency, and confidence in the data is imperative, not just for where we were. Ruschlikon will run you through kind of those sort of benefits. But as we move forward in trying to digitize this market and utilize AI. When I first moved over to the UK, there were some very interesting conversations because we used different words to describe the same thing. That's okay. Footpath, sidewalk. We may have different ways of pronouncing the same word. Yogurt. So there are kind of things that you can work out in real time. The problem starts to come up when you have the same word being used to describe two different things. Thongs, for example. So being clear on what a data point means, being consistent in the application of that, and having confidence that the data source is accurate, correct, etc., is really, really important as we move forward as a marketplace. So that's why data standards are important. ACORD, an introduction. Looking around, there are many people here whose faces I don't recognize. So ACORD is probably relatively new to you. ACORD is a data standards body for the insurance industry. We've been around just over 50 years, so quite a while now. I'm just going to go ahead and go. ACORD consists of various standards, so not just GRLC. So we've got AML, we've got P&C, we've got various standards that have kind of evolved over those 50 years. I look after GRLC specifically. GRLC stands for Global Reinsurance and Large Commercial. So basically our bread and butter here in the London market. It has been around, so it's not quite as old as ACORD. It's the new kid on the block in terms of ACORD standards. It's been around about 20 years. I think we started in about 2008. We look after three main functional areas: placing, accounting, and then accounting and claims. Accounting and claims is slightly more mature because it is easier. It's transactional, it's like one after the other. It is easier to implement. E-placing, probably in the last, it's taken off, I'm going to turn to you, Simon, maybe in the last three years, where we've really focused our attention to it. And we think that is the area that we can most benefit from as we move forward, because you're starting right at the beginning of the process rather than in the middle in the back office. But Terry and Emma will run you through some of the work that we've done in accounting and claims. So that is why data standards are important and an introduction to ACORD. If anybody wants to know anything more in terms of the work that we do within ACORD, I'm happy to take questions afterwards, either as part of the panel set or outside having lunch, apparently. Yeah. ACORD GRLC. So I'm just going to run you a little bit of the work that we do for our members. So we run working groups. We currently have 3 working groups in operation. One is accounting and claims, very, very mature. They are right down to the granular detail now. E-placing has been around for about 3 years. We are working through the data points on a placing overall and a placing touch point specific. So we're starting right at the beginning from submission, what data is required there, what sort of schema, what validations, right down to post-placement. So we're working our way through that and then considering different contract types as we go. And the technical design authority, because Jason is very important now. So we're now looking at how we would adopt the standards for a JSON-based implementations. We work really closely with different implementation communities. Ruschlikon is one of those implementation communities. Ruschlikon, and it's probably the most successful of all of the ACORD partnerships. with our members. Ruschlikon, these guys will run you through a little bit more about what that is. It is brokers and carriers getting together and deciding how they will use the standards. And we work closely with them on how that is. So they look specifically at process. It's a great way to make sure that we, within ACORD, are actually responding to the needs of our members. And the London Market Data Council, which Kirstin will run you through. We provide, as a result of all of this collaboration, all of these discussions, a number of business resources. So these include implementation guides, a very, very comprehensive data dictionary. When I go back to clarity and consistency, we have a data dictionary which is built up over the last 20 years. And it defines not just each data point, but its relation to one another. So how you would do a calculation of net settlement based on all of the different factors that are included in that. Reference data and codes. So we have a very, very large, scarily large codes and code sets database. So perils, classes of business. I'm just going to pick those two because those seem to come up a lot, but it's comprehensive. We also provide technical resources. So these are in terms of schemas. We have a test harness. We currently have one in XML to support the accounting and claims XML implementations. We are developing a JSON-based one, which will support the placing implementation and certification. So that provides confidence that as you are onboarding a new business partner, that they have met a minimum standard prior to you starting your onboarding. I can't remember what last one is. Developer resources. That includes some of those technical resources as well. You also have access to our team as part of membership. So any questions, etc. We run a number of learning sessions with our members to kind of help them on their journey. Right. Standards, projects and advisory groups. So these were the three I mentioned earlier. E-placing looks at the placing process, defines the data points, the schemas, the validation rules. And that meets every other Wednesday from 3 to, let me work it out. That doesn't quite make sense. 3 to 4:30, Liz. Liz runs our e-placing group. Accounting and claims. It's a working group that looks at accounting and claims, obviously. And it meets every other Wednesday also. And the Technical Design Authority, that meets once a month on Thursdays. So all of our members have access to these groups, and this is how we make changes to the standards. So as it happens quite often, an enhancement based on a new use case will be presented to that group, and they will look at how to reflect that enhancement or that use case within the standards. That's jumping a bit too quickly. Implementation communities. I talked about the implementation communities we work with. We don't have the resources to have to work on every single project, help you on every single project that you work on. So we work with implementation communities to work through the standards rather than on a one-to-one basis. So Ruschlikon, what I think we've talked about a lot. Ruschlikon actually collaborate with us on the e-placing and the accounting and claims. So it is so rather than them run their working groups separately, we do that as a joint collaborative. London Market Data Council. We've worked closely with the London Market Data Council since its inception 2 years ago. And that includes kind of all of the work we did with Blueprint 2. And I'm looking around and I worked with some of you on that initially, but we are continuing our work with the Data Council as Blueprint 2 phase 1 kind of works itself out. And Lloyd's. So we have developed a couple of very specific schemas and subsets of the standards to support Lloyd's. So these include LDR, which some of you may be familiar with. We've developed a schema for CRS, so the cover holder reporting standards, talking too quickly. And we generally collaborate with them and have discussions with them on their London market modernisation initiatives. Lloyd's are also represented on each of those SPGs in the steering committees that are run by Ruschlikon, as well as our program advisory committee. So we work heavily with those. Business resources, just to give you an indication of what some of these business resources look like. Implementation guides is what you'd expect. They are substantial. So if you have a question about how to implement something, the implementation guide should tell you the answer. If it doesn't, then we would provide some SMEs to you to help you through that. Data files. So you can't really see it there, but they are great big spreadsheets which follow the schema and then tell you on a data point by data point basis what the definition is, what type it is, what the format is, what validation rules will be applied to that. That is very, very useful as you're doing your implementations. In order to standardize messaging, you must know that everybody is applying the same validation rules. So as a broker, you don't want to receive coming back different queries based on the schema or the data point from different carriers. So there is consistency there. As a carrier, you don't want to receive if the same file but it be inconsistent in terms of the data within it. So premium, how do we define premium? Where do we get it from? There is a need for those things to be very, very specific if you're talking about digitizing our marketplace. Conceptual data models. So every single message that we have has a conceptual data model. That helps you in your implementations and your mapping. So it tells you the relationship between data points in the message. And then the online data dictionary. This allows you to look on a data point by data point basis. If you don't want to look at a great big file, you just want to see what the UMR maps to, for example. You don't want to look at a data file, you want to do it on a point by point basis. You want to look up an attribute. All right, so I'm going to just take that back there for a minute. This is just an example of some of the stuff that we provide to help you on your implementation journey. Technical assets and developer resources. I'm not going to read them all out. You can see them there. If you've got any questions on any of these, I probably am not the person to answer, but I can point you in the direction of the person who can. But we have a lot. And that takes me to the end. I'll take questions at the end, if that's okay with everybody, just to move it along. Terry.
I don't think it's me yet, and Emma takes the next slide, but I'm going to click up.
Excellent.
It's not my only job.
I'll apologise in advance. I'm not the best public speaker in the world, and I often forget to breathe. So if I pass out, then you know that's the reason. And yeah, thank you. So Clarissa has mentioned a lot around the use of data standards under the Ruschlikon community, and I use that word community because that's what we are. We're not a vendor, we're not a supplier. We are a community of insurers, reinsurers, brokers that have come together to drive the implementation of these standards across the global market. So from Asia Pac, US, UK, Europe, right across the globe. And all our members are using those data standards in different ways to deliver different things and what they would want from their organisation. Examples of how those data standards are used at the moment within the Ruschlikon community are faster cache, higher efficiency, automation, better detailed information, structured data, and the end result is an enhanced client service to all with fewer queries, faster turnaround times, all the things that we talk about that we want to provide within this industry. The way in which we do that, Clarissa's touched on a lot of it, but ACORD facilitates Ruschlikon meetings and provides the standards that us as a community uses, the GRLC standard. Ruschlikon has two steering committees, but one on the placing side and then the accounting and claims respectively. These groups provide guidance and strategy for the community around how they can interact with ACORD and give governance to ensure that you can deliver the optimum results. You know, we're all working under one language, as Clarissa said. It drives uniform adoption of the data standards. Now, when we say that, it is a uniform adoption of the standard, but how each partner uses it is up to them. Some carriers have a very strong appetite to automate and pay claims very, very quickly. Others want the actual data out of it to do more analysis. So everyone can pick and choose how they want to use it, but the best practice is there to give guidance. Beyond the steering committees, we have the regional implementation groups. Obviously, Terry and I co-chair, so we have programmed carrier representation. We co-chair the UK implementation group. But again, we have those in the APAC regions, Europe. MENA is looking to gather some pace, and then in the Americas. Then various members of those implementation groups sit on market bodies. So, for example, I sit on the IUA SOTIG, and then we're joining up all the dots around delivery. Traditionally, reinsurers have led this initiative, so they are very mature. That I think Swiss Re's journey started in 2008, might have even been earlier than that, but I think that's when the first messages were exchanged. But that is steadily changing, and the announcement of Blueprint 2, way back when, probably a swear word to say here at the moment, but that really kicked off the engagement, and we noticed a real uptake on the insurance part of the market as well, with more and more insurers coming online. Liberty being one of those, as an example, we've implemented on our insurance side, and our latest engagement following in Access footsteps is with Marsh, who we should go live with on our insurance book in October of this year. So we've really seen that ramp up, and that in itself has brought, not challenges, that's too strong a word, but it's brought a different emphasis on how the standards are used. Having sat on both sides of the fence, from a reinsurer and insurer side, one side is very reactive to the messages, and the other side is proactive in using the information, that has been proactive and then is using that information retrospectively. Future sessions will delve into the placement and post-placement. Obviously, today we're talking about data standards, but one of the messages that we as a community want to get across is that with the extended timeline now, with the Blueprint 2 delivery, it really does give companies the opportunity to look at those global standards, which will be adopted as part of that end delivery. And Ruschlikon can support organisations within the delivery of that. There's a lot of experience within the community, and Terry and Tim will touch on that. But we've all made lots of mistakes, and as a community, those mistakes are shared, and that can only benefit others to get their implementations right first time and get the most out of it. So, yeah, Tim, Terry, I'm not sure.
It's me. I thought it was Tim. I was sweating quite here. So I guess to make it clear, I'm more from an operational background, so I don't really care for tech, don't really care for data. Not really sure why I'm here. The reason why I'm passionate about everything Ruschlikon and ACORD is operational efficiency, and it takes a lot of the frictional, non-value add work away from the individuals. Now, I'll come up from a kind of technical background, claims technician, claims technical broker, and it's the things that we can do now with the data that we are sharing and the common data standards that actually now make that role quite exciting, and actually the insights that we can get off the back of doing it. So that's my interest, not the bit that these guys like. So we'll take you through this. I was going to be lazy and just let you read the slide, but I'll try and talk you through some of it. So these are basically anecdotes from some of the community members and implementers. And I guess so all of these, there is a case study behind it. So on the Ruschlikon website, check it out. Literally just put Ruschlikon into your favourite search engine, Google, obviously. And the Ruschlikon website come out. There's a ton of information, videos, case studies, webinars, and all of this is basically supported by material. So just walking through some Munich Re, partner Re score, so improved cash flow, basically daily financial statement handling, speeds up the cash flow. Now, it doesn't have to be daily. Everybody can have a bespoke approach. It can be daily, it can be kind of twice weekly, whatever you want. But the fact that the options are there and the fact that everything now in a financial statement is actually already agreed. Today, in our business, certainly where people aren't Ruschlikon implementers or ACORD implementers, we'll send them a statement of stuff that means nothing to them. Half of it is probably queried, half of it is unrecognised. In this world, everything that you request for payment is actually being technically agreed. Partner read, 91% of book balance is automatically mapped to financial account. Again, this all comes down to the data standards, the fact that you recognise everything that's coming in the door. And score 50% improvement in turnaround times is not TAT or TIT. 50% improvement time, turnaround times for claims payments. And again, all of these are at a point in time. Every single one of these continues to increase, continues to improve. The processes internally continue to evolve. Improved data integrity. So AON WTW report, secure, auditable, facilitated by the query management system. These are all kind of peer-to-peer encrypted messages typically. So no different to a WhatsApp, as opposed to an email, which basically bounces around the internet and may or may not end up in the right place without being interfered with by anybody else. So you've got that security. MAP-free, 23% improved data quality. And again, it's quite easy to put an extra zero in something that you've got that you're now putting onto your system from a piece of paper. So it doesn't rely on keying, rekeying and rekeying through various systems. It's literally, once you ingest the data, that's it. It's locked in. You can use that through various up, down systems. Increased efficiency. So up to 70%, Willis Towers Watson have reported up to 70% turnaround times for query handling. As part of the latest version, 2016-10 and 2016-10.2, there's a two-way query function. So within the application, it's not an application, but within the guides, there's a two-way query function. So we can send as a broker to our carrier a technical account. You can then query to say, actually, this doesn't make sense, or you've forgotten an attachment. Again, all of the messages can be supported by attachments as well. Same with the queries. So again, you've now got something that's come internally. I know that I've sent it to a carrier. I also know they've received it through the acknowledgements. I also now know that there's a query. That query would also kind of send a notification, let's say, depending on how your organisation is structured. It'll send a notification to that individual technician to say, this carrier has queried your transaction. Here's what the detail is. And again, from an individual, it's fantastic. From a business perspective, I now know how many technical accounts have been queried by them. You can also then use that information to drill down by how many queries do we receive by this carrier in respect to this business. So again, your brain starts to go a little bit dizzy in how you can use this data both internally and externally, but also for performance, also improving your own internal processes, procedures, and education, knowledge shares, you name it. 50%, so MAP-free, 50% reduction in reconciliation work. Again, everything you're receiving relates to something that you've already agreed. So it's kind of work that's already done. You're not chasing your tail. Swissbury, 67% improvement in turnaround times for booking of treaty accounts. Largely, a lot of these accounts are people have to individually book and store documentation. A lot of this is now automated. It's also automated triaging, automatic kind of technical validation when it comes through the door. So a lot of that is taken away from the individual from the first time they look at it. Cost reductions, elimination of unallocated cash and electronic portfolio. Again, auto allocation. There's also some AXA, again, they've done some auto, not just auto allocation, but auto cash matching. Again, I'm sure a lot of our organisations have a lot of people doing this work. This doesn't mean to say that they're now redundant. It means that you can redeploy those experts to do something that adds value to your organisation. 60% reduction in manual effort in processing claim transactions. Again, this is all to do with automation routines, technical checks, validation. So everything that comes through on an ACORD message is already validated before it gets in. If it's not, and it doesn't pass certain rules and routines and parameters, it won't get into your estate. On an email, I can send you anything, any attachment, may not even be for you. I put in the wrong, well, Nick has come up and I've sent it to Howden's as opposed to GC. Process automation, again, everything we've spoken about, but again, you can be as clever or as cautious as you want. Now you can automate every single subsequent advice for a post first notification. You can also automate every settlement request up to the reserve. Again, it's all down to you and your trust, not just on the client portfolio, but the broker and the relationships that you can have. Again, it's all bespoke. And typically, the more mature you become, the more you evolve, the more you become, you're looking at the exceptions as opposed to the rule. Flip on to the next. Increased effectiveness. So Aon, again, reporting significant reduction in queries compared to traditional approach. A lot of this is because of the verification and validations. If there's no attachment, you can set up rules to say this needs an attachment. So again, nobody needs to look at that. Nobody needs to pick it up. Nobody needs to put it in there in basket. It's quite an old term in basket, isn't it? Sorry. Again, Swiss Re and AXA, 60-day improvement in information transfer between trading partners. And again, there's a case study to support that. And a webinar to go in tandem, and 69% improvement in turnaround times for cash allocation. Again, this is just the start, and there's a whole lot more we can do. Now, Tim, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to walk through a couple of the maturity and efficiency curves. So there's obviously a journey to go on. You don't immediately get all of the benefits, but first, just to counter slightly Clarissa's introduction. So the first half of my business life was actually on the business end, doing both placing from a broker perspective and also premium accounting into Benedettic, etc. So I'm more of a practitioner that's got into systems type of things. And I'm sure there's many people here that are very technical, so the questions afterwards probably not going to get into the very technical elements of those questions. But also worth re-emphasising as well that we don't compete with ACORD standards. So within Ruschlikon is a genuine collaboration. We need the brokers to work with other brokers to agree to make enhancements for elements that will suit carriers. Similarly for the broker side, the bits that they will need, it's actually the carrier that will need to actually develop those. So we sort of collaborate and make sure that when we come to the new releases, there is a package that suits everybody. Where we do compete, we all have our own internal system landscapes, and those are all very different. So that's where we do come into that very much competitive area. As someone's mentioned previously, what we actually decide to work on is different for each organisation. So generally speaking, you won't immediately get all of the benefits, but you will find, coming new to this, that many of your providers already have ACORD or Ruschlikon enabled systems. So you may not be starting with that standalone message handling tool. We recently had Aquasure Re a few months ago, their first implementation, and they benefited from using the same processing system as Gallagher Re and Carthorpe. So when they first went live, they're actually towards the top end of this efficiency maturity curve straight away, get all of those benefits. But even for those that are starting at the bottom of the message management tool, as carriers, what you'll benefit from is seeing exactly how the brokers arrived at their figures in the technical account. So you have all of the individual items breakdown. So when you're comparing that against your own records, if the figures don't match up, rather than automatically going back with a query, you look at the broker's elements and think, oh, actually, we've got something on here. We'll reprocess our entry and it reduces the amount of queries. Whereas you do need to go back to the broker, as Terry mentioned, as a two-way query piece, so suddenly you could be more explicit in exactly what you think is wrong in the data that they provided, which gets to the basis for the query in the first place. And also you've got that two-way query piece where all of the data around the query is logged. So everyone knows exactly who's got that next action. So like I say, well, most of the benefits are actually achieved when you start integrating with your own systems. Some of the things you do, one of the highlights of the use cases is lots of people working around the query management piece. Just to re-emphasise some of the things that Terry went through there. We saw with Aon a significant reduction in the volume of queries compared to the traditional approach. And Terry says some of these use cases are 2 to 3 years old, so it's been improved a lot further. And on the Willis side, they got up to a 70% reduction in turnaround time. And when we come to doing the reconciling against the ledgers, Map 3 got 50% reduction in reconciliation work. And then, as I said, on the financial account automation, once you start going to that route, partner E, 91% book balances automatically mapped to financial account. Sales, again, this was a few years ago, a 69% improvement in turnaround time for cash allocation. But our assignments at AXA was quite a while ago as well, the elimination of unallocated cash. So all significant benefits for parties. When we start putting all of this together and doing some more complex automation, remember the presentation a while ago now from Danny Hickey from Guy Carpenter, my colleague from Rico, looking on the claim side of things. And prior to the presentation, Danny went through their system to look at how fast they had some claims agreements. And from the time of actually clicking send in the broker system to receiving the message back to say that the claim had been agreed, the quickest one he found was 14 seconds. So we're now measuring in sort of hours, minutes and seconds, not days and weeks. To bring that on to what we've achieved at Swiss Re. That's off the top of my head, just three. So the more complex scenarios where we're getting multiple currencies through and reinstatements, we collate all of those messages and go through a series of steps. And those type of transactions generally take 2 to 3 hours, rather than minutes or seconds. And from Q2 2025, our automation rates are measured for premiums. This isn't just for Ruschlikon business, so we do have some tools that transform other submissions into or messaging, but the vast majority is Ruschlikon. On the premium side, Q2 results were 79% automated. And on the claim side, it was 77% automated. Now, not all of that is full automation. So you go into a business rule, sometimes the system won't understand exactly what to do. So we then have business users look at it, decide what the next action is, push it back into process. But our straight through, or what we call no touch processing, the rates are currently between 35 and 40%. And just this month, we've gone live with first notifications. So hopefully we'll get similar levels there as well. Again, those are going to be more semi-automated to start off with, due to the volume, as you can expect from the ITC alerts. Someone's going to need to review aspects of it, but we'll start to automate more of them as we go. On the placing side,
We did.
Yes.
Tim's going to go into details about future sessions, so I won't go into much detail. The work placing group and our work on post-placement messages are going to feature there. But what I want to go into today is talk about more about what's different about the Ruschlikon e-placing in comparison to what we've previously seen in London. So generally speaking, what we've had is initiatives in London look at what's the low-hanging fruit, the easy things to implement first, where's the big benefits we can get. That's generally around endorsements. For most endorsements, obviously the contract data is already loaded into all of our systems. So all of that is readily available. The problems start to occur, so get great success on the endorsement front, then move back to the actual firm order placement base. That's where the problems start to occur. And for me, there's two reasons for that. The first one is because the broker, certainly from my time as a broker, which admittedly a long time ago, we've got some brokers in here that can confirm. But generally speaking, loading the data into our systems wasn't the priority. We had to prioritise was creating the contracts, the MRCs, and all of the supporting information. So we have some information in our system, but it might be removed from the previous year's contract or just copied from a completely different contract, just to create a basis to have a system record. And then we focused on the actual contracts. And once all the placements were in, that's when we tidied everything up, started putting all contract data in, ready to do our sign lines. So to get all of that contract data up front, it's really important for us as carriers, when we talk about all these electronic placement initiatives, we as carriers say we're happy to get involved as long as the broker provides all of the data up front. That just doesn't fit their business process. So they go away and try and accommodate us. But when it comes to certain territories and classes, you'll find that speed to market is important. Some business gets offered to multiple brokers. So they're not going to take the time in the effort to load all the data up front. Otherwise, they risk losing the business altogether. And the second problem is where is the benefit to the brokers if they're providing all the contract data up front? When they do run into these problems, if all they're getting in return is our written lines, our references electronically, how do they justify all of that investment just for that small return? So the difference on the Ruschlikon side, rather than starting at the end of the process and working back, we've started right at the beginning of the process. And we're currently developing around submission packages and quotes. So it's still all very much under development, so we're not anywhere, we're right at the very bottom of the screen. We've not even got a live version just yet. We had originally planned 4 organisations working on towards pilots. Original plan was to go live earlier in the year, but it's looking like probably going to be January placements before we do actually go live with them. And in that scenario, what's going to happen is the broker will provide a certain amount of information. So obviously the UMR, type of contract, whether it's an excess of loss or quote share or surplus treaty, class of business, preferably the limits. It doesn't matter too much whether it's all completely accurate other than the UMR. What would then happen that we as a lead carrier will put all of the data that's involved on the MRC into our pricing tools to generate a quote. And as a byproduct of that, we will then have all of that contract data that we will be able to supply back to the broker. Now, if the client agrees with that quote, accepts that quote, and the broker can ingest all that information into our system, and suddenly they do now have a full contract data set that they can pass on to all of the following carriers. So then you get into a scenario where all of the data is loaded once by the lead carrier, whoever the quote acceptance is, and then all other parties to the contract suddenly have using exactly the same data. So again, all of our interpretation, knowing back to Chris's point, all of our interpretation about the words on the contract, all of that goes away. The difference is there because we're all using exactly the same data. And for the broker, obviously the big benefit there is that suddenly they're getting all their contract load done for them, all that information feeding into their systems. So when they have done the full placement, suddenly they can get to their signed line allocation a lot quicker. And again, that helps us as carriers. We get the sign line with our details through, and we can immediately process that through our systems rather than the sign line sitting in someone's email box. And when we have, say, a signing of 80%, suddenly we can reallocate over 20% capacity off to larger lines on other renewals in that period, or to write completely new business. So they're some of the things that we're looking at and benefits going forward. Like I say, we're not quite there yet. We are very much on the beginning of that journey. Other areas that will be useful around subjectivities and conditions, warranties, etc., where you're receiving all of that data. So similar to the query side, all of that can be logged, tracked, mapped, etc. Huge benefits going forward. We have got quite a way to go.
So, thanks, Tim. So, earlier I obviously referred to the implementation groups, which you can see down there are the initial part of the Ruschlikon structure, and then those other committees that feed into the steer codes that sit there at the top of the value chain. I realise Tim has thrown out some bold numbers there in terms of a claim in 14 seconds, and I know that when I was told by my former employer 10 years ago that I would be getting involved with this, I sat there and I rolled and was like, come on, as if this is like going to come off. But when you actually see it develop and literally it is in real time and you're watching it go back and forth and work with the brokers, which is what the community now do. We work with the brokers, look where the pain points are, look to make all those improvements. Each organisation can get out of it what they want to be. The Swiss Re's of the world, they want, they want the automation, they want the fast turnaround time and claims. That might not be what Liberty, as an example, what Liberty might want the detail to be able to extract it and have better data behind it. It may be you want a combination of both, but I think the message here is it's a reality and it is already being used. I think of the Ruschlikon steering committee members last year, I think there was 13 million messages exchanged back and forth. So when we talk about London, the removal of London as delivery of Blueprint 2, these data standards are already being used and used very well, and there is an opportunity for the market to to look at it in readiness for the Blueprint 2 timeline. So I would actively encourage anyone here, if you're not part of the Ruschlikon community and you're interested to find out more, to come along to one of the implementation group meetings, and you get to hear what other members in the community are doing and who they're engaging with, where they're seeing pain points, etc. But yeah.
One more thing I forgot to highlight is particularly around the claims side. So the important thing to notice is that it's not always automated. So what we do is put the control in the hands of our claims handlers. And they decide which claims go into the automation, which we call flow, or the more complex ones, which they still maintain control over, wants to review themselves. And they can switch between the two at any point.
Well, I'm the interloper here in most cases. So in contrast to my dear friend Terry, I am a technologist, a complete hardened geek. So I have my first arrival in the market from a family business point of view, age 12 or 13, discussing how you calculate an overriding commission on a proportional treaty. So the combination of insurance, reinsurance, and utter data geekness is there aren't a lot of us around. And this has posed some of the challenges, which is why the valuable assets and resources at ACORD for the market is really, really important. The Data Council, which was formed as part of the move for digitisation, the transformation in the London market, is a collective of the associations. So that's the IUA, that's LIBA, that's the LMA. It comes under the auspices of the LMG, lots of acronyms. Hopefully most of you know what they are. Ask afterwards if you don't. And then market participants from pretty well all the major brokers and the major carriers. And then, of course, the absence of any technologists. So hence why when it formed, Sheila Cameron, who is the current chair of the Data Council, looked at how one would be able to complement that to advise on things that were really outside the remit of those participants. Now, all three of the major subscription market placing platforms, which we haven't really mentioned so far today, are present as well. But again, they're from the senior C-suite part. So to give you some idea of what it was like on the first day of turning up to Data Council, I turned up with a wooden spoon. And I explained how an API worked. And obviously, if you are the person talking, then you have the wooden spoon and you can pass it to somebody else, and then they can talk and we can't. And we all think that APIs are the answer, probably to the question nobody ever asked. But they really do only fulfill a very small set of tasks. So when somebody says, I've got an API, it probably only does one thing. And it's not that the business community thinks that AI and APIs can solve every single solution. They need to be based on accurate data. And to pick up something that Clarissa said with regards to interpreting different meanings, my pet one in the whole chain of MGAs, cover holders, carriers, whether they're company market, whether they're the Lloyd's market, brokers, everybody, is that they pretty well all have a different interpretation of the word brokerage. So an MGA and a carrier puts it away, and a broker keeps it. So the lens that I think Tim referred to, the lens that you are looking at something will differ as that data is going through the chain. So it's really important to understand those elements. So as we said, we've got the representation on this. There are then underneath it working groups. I either co-chair or chair most of the CDR working groups, just because in case anyone's fallen asleep, how many people have heard of the CDR? Go on, put your hands on. Okay, not everybody, which is really quite interesting. Okay, the CDR, put it on there. So the core data record. What's interesting here is we used to have something called the common core record for everyone sort of about 50 years old in the room, which sort of phased out of popularity in the mid-1990s. Every single one of the 21 fields of data that was in the core common core record you can find in the core data. So all that happened was in the 90s, we weren't ready for it yet. We had to go away, we had to rummage around, we had to get onto emails, we had to get onto all this technology stuff. And now we've come full circle and go, yeah, we really ought to understand what brokerage means. And we really ought to also understand what each of these data points are in their context. And as Clarissa has covered, that context of understanding the definitions of each data point are really valuable. The Data Council was responsible collectively for publishing the core data record version 5.3.2. There's too many version numbers going on. 3.2, that's it. MRC version 3, CDR version 3.2 for insurance and FAC-RI open market only. So as Tim said, sometimes it's looking at a small case study and then trying to work out how we get something over the line and then bridge that out and make it more and more covering the market. And Ruschlikon, in contrast, had really focused, as you've heard everyone speak, in very much the reinsurance world, the treaty world, that accounting and settlement piece. So it's quite a nice sort of nestling of the two angles coming together. And what we've all realised is it's all very well coming up with a business dictionary, a technical business dictionary that does indeed tell us how long a field needs to be, or what it really means, or what it depends on to meet a Spanish motor insurance requirement on a regulatory basis, that reuse of the data for multiple purposes. It's really interesting to now see this merging together. Nobody now wants to reinvent new standards. We want to use the standards that are there and then see how they can be used for multiple purposes. Now, the other thing which is really important is that the CDR, the core data record, is not solely a Blueprint 2 thing. I think a lot of people have walked away with the idea that Blueprint 2 is this entire overarching banner of something that is going to have a big launch, and then everybody is just going to switch a magic switch in their software, and suddenly it'll all just work. It's a really long journey. And to your point about having that movement of the Blueprint 2 sort of delivery dates, this is phase 1. That is the really the plumbing. That's the best way to see phase 1. To get that plumbing working, we now have been given some breathing room. Because in essence, the idea of going on a Blueprint 2 phase 1 switchover was scaring most people in the market. They've got their own interactions, they've got their own integrations, and they've got their own technology stack. It may be interesting to think that about 70% of the market have core systems somewhere that don't get updated more than once every 2 years. So if you think about how many differences would have to be implemented, and to then go through a release cycle, you couldn't really introduce something that affects those systems in under a 2-year cycle. So we've been given breathing room, and this is a fantastic opportunity for people to leverage those standards and accelerate further through their journey. So when we had a new crew, every couple of years, the idea is to have a sort of a new refresh crew on the Data Council. The first thing we did as a Data Council was to recommit the idea of that commitment to data first, digital transformation, data first. We're not talking about eBay and Amazon, but we are talking about getting the fast turnaround, the quick responses, and using common standards to achieve those. So this is the history of what has happened so far. So 2023, that first version came out. We had a number of data points. There are indeed 232 data points. I should get out more that I recycle these on my head and really should get a bit more of a social life. 232 data points, but they're made up of about 120, 130 pieces of information. And there's a distinct difference between that. When somebody says premium on an MRC, and they go, well, I'm just having this piece of premium and I want to record it, it's probably made up of currency, an amount of a figure, and a basis. So there are fewer pieces of information than there are data points. And in the business, we're probably more interested in the information. So if somebody says, I only got to collect 13 bits of information to start off an initial submission, chilled. I could do that. Not a problem. The fact about one of the pieces of analysis, we found 5 carriers didn't actually collect the expiry date on the first piece of data that came through was a little more worrying, but there you go. So what we're at the moment is that we've gone through the process of the community, the group, same kind of idea as the Ruschlikon group. We create these working groups, and we've completed the treaty piece. And the journey that it goes on is the community articulate what they feel that should be in the core data record. We set a bar. The data has to be testable. It's got to be viable. We've got to be able to explain it. It will use GRLC data standards from the reference lists where relevant, or ISO codes, or any other standards that are appropriate. And then it goes through a consultation for the London market and everybody else to pitch in and comment. Then it will go to Velinetic. Velinetic will look at it and say, you've missed off a piece of vital data, or that's fine, we're okay with that. And then finally it goes to ACORD for them to tell us that everything that we put in there is either already in the standards, or it could be proposed to the community group in ACORD for adoption into the standards. Only after that stage and it being validated will it be published back to the market. So the treaties are in that stage at the moment. They're about to be rubber stamped by ACORD, having gone through all of those stages. The claims groups have now done a claims CDR. Obviously, it's an interesting concept. It's not just the placing side. That claim CDR has gone through the working groups. It will now go to consultation. It will then go through to Velinetic, and then it will go back to ACORD for alignment and to check. And bear in mind, ACORD are present on the working group, so we shouldn't have gone too far adrift from everything that is already in the standards. So then finally, the one that hasn't started yet is the contract of delegation in the world of DUA. So the idea is no one's proposing at this stage that there'll be a CDR for each individual declaration that's created, but that there would be the master contract, just like any other contract. And that master contract will have the same kind of basis of using ISO codes for countries. What do we do with international waters that isn't an ISO code? Working through all of those elements so that we can all be talking the same language. So this then gives you a little bit of some nice takeaways, so at least you come away with something useful from, that's specific. We've got the CDR versus the MRC and the CDR versus the CRP. So CDR, core data record. The MRC is the market reform contract, and the CDR versus the CRP, which is the contract and risk processing message that is the ACORD message itself. So you can regard the CDR as the payload. It is the actual data items in it, the bit that the business person would understand and could be articulated at a bit of a push. And I'm not a great spreadsheet fan, but it basically could be articulated as a series of points that you could read. The turning it into a CRP message now is in the ACORD format using the schema, and that is the bit that you can then exchange with other parties involved, and most importantly, potentially go to Velinetic so that they can then record the position of that contract. The MRC, of course, doesn't contain certain things by default that will be in the CDR, such as the schedule of values, or indeed the schedule of taxes, or indeed the schedule of additional insureds, which is usually a paragraph at the top of the MRC that says all the other people that are insured, which is all well and good, not easy to sanction check. So you can see how the overlap happens and who is responsible. Take this with a little bit of caution. The responsibility piece is a little bit of a hot potato. The idea is that we think the carrier knows those bits of data, the broker knows those bits of data, how they move from A to B, who approves it, who creates it, still a little bit up for debate because of the different parties that are involved in the market. So then when you look at the field count, and you can see the most important thing I think the market needs to maybe shift from is, first of all, this isn't part of Blueprint 2 necessarily, this is about trading in the London market. And secondly, don't get too hung up about the total number of data points, think of it more as pieces of information. And specifically in the work that the Ruschlikon group are doing, where we're starting to now realise we're both going to the same aim, which is how many pieces of data are initial record that comes into the broker's house, how many bits of data leave the broker and go out and ask for a compounding indication, and how many bits of data are leaving the broker and asking for a quote, and how many bits of data are coming back again before we put a bow on it, it's fully signed down, we send it into Velinetic. So the CDR has now grown in its importance, perhaps, than just something that gets submitted to the Central Bureau. So feedback and benefits, I ran out of space that you could read. They are literally almost a never-ending list of potential benefits that you can do. So on the CDR, I've seen in so for declaring of complete transparency, I also work for Verisk. I run a software house for 30 odd years, but in this capacity, I take those hats on. But I've seen within that group, I've seen auto follow, I've seen auto decline, I've seen data only being inputted once and flowing all the way from broker through the placing platform out to the carrier and back again, with no piece of data being implemented, being input twice. I've seen a full risk being placed in real time by the time it took somebody to drink a cup of coffee. And we tested it live. And it's almost exclusively the CDR that's doing it. Now, at the moment, for declaration of transparency, there is no destination for the CRP in terms of Belenetic until Blueprint 2 rolls out. But that does not stop people actually implementing and benefiting from it today. We can understand what brokerage is. We can understand what a difference of an excess to a deductible is and possibly agree on either side of the pond exactly what the definition is. So these things are really, really valuable, and they played beautifully into supplementing and extending the ACORD standards so that we're now talking for DUA, insurance, PACRI, and treaties, a common set of standards that everyone can understand.
Let's give that a round of applause.
Totally technologist.
So before I hand over for questions, either pre-prepared or some of yours, please, I will make up my previous transgression of not actually introducing people properly by saying thank you very much to our panelists and presenters, which is Clarissa, Terry, Tim, Kirstin and Emma. And then just do a very, very quick wrap up from an IUA perspective, because I appreciate that everyone in this room has probably come at this from a very different angle, depending whether you're data focused, business focused, tech focused. And what we are talking about here, it's going to come as no surprise to any of you to understand that, I mean, we rely so heavily as an industry on shared data, and quite frequently that data is not data that we create ourselves, it's come from somewhere else. And the more automated that our market becomes, the more critical it will be that that data is known and understood universally as it crosses several boundaries into different buildings and into no longer pairs of hands, but into different microchips, right? That's getting ingested with a level of automation and a level of binary oversight, which currently doesn't exist. There is discretion in humans, there is none in computers. So this is critical, as much like the whole that outside this building, which I saw some of you admiring earlier. One day there will be a beautiful building on top of that, right? And that is going to be all of your AI projects. That's the stuff which your internal data science teams are going to get really excited about, right? But without the right foundations, kind of the bit that no one really sees and frankly bores a lot of people, none of that is going to work. So the absolute foundation of the more exciting projects, be that central services, digitisation, no names mentioned, other brands may exist, or really exciting stuff that you're doing in your own four walls, right? Without the right foundations, none of that will work. So with that, I am opening up for questions from Seb.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you very much for this. Work by LMA claims team. So there's no question about the data points. Because you said 144, and just so I understand in my simple brain, does that mean that Liberty, for example, and Swiss Re have agreed on the 144 data points are exactly the same for both? But if Liberty would like to have more data points, so they have 160, that means that's completely up to them. For example, they want to measure something completely different that Swiss Re does not want to measure. Or am I thinking about it wrong?
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head. So the first thing is when we talk about the number of data points is, let's take the published version of the CDR at the moment, 232 points. There is no CDR that can do 232 points. And we know this for starters, because we did some gamification set amongst the working groups, and somebody had to come up with a real life scenario for the most complex CDR and the simplest CDR. So the simplest CDR needed to say fell into the PACRI world, the complex ones fell into the insurance side. The most complex is Spanish motor, and that's because you have to include a schedule of values, and for each of the vehicles, you have to include the weight of the vehicles. So you're getting down into some really tiny pieces of data. And don't blame the London market, that's local regulatory requirements, and therefore to enjoy the Lloyd's licenses, they obviously have to collect that. So it's more about a combination. The first gate that went through was whether it will be mandatory or conditional mandatory to satisfy regulatory requirements, and in a declaration that is Lloyd's regulatory requirements. So that is a threshold it had to meet. For accounting and settlement, which will be universal. For whether it is for tax reconciliation, you said you were going to charge this tax at £2.50. Did you charge it when it turns up on the technical entry? and for ethanol matching. So the fact there is a contract before an ethanol turns up. So those were the thresholds. So anything that was untestable, or there was a bit of a grey area about things that are optional, like have you got a beneficiary on the CDR at the placing stage? Well, it says if applicable to the contract. Computers are notoriously difficult at being able to guess what your intention was. Yeah, so if there was one, you should declare it, but the computer can't tell you you've got it wrong if you don't. So when we're talking about the core data record, it had to meet those thresholds, and those thresholds involved Lloyd's Tax and Regs team, it involves Belenetic, it involves ACORD, it involves the market participants. Therefore, they collectively have agreed for the multiple purposes that the CDR takes on. Those are the data points that are needed. To your point, if somebody wants more, then the beauty of the CDR and the ACORD standards they're based on is that the structure you've got is now dictated. After all, Tim and I have torn hair out over the years over what on earth is a section. Yes, fundamental splits, all of these nightmarish things that don't seem to make sense to the front end, but have to be in there to be able to do all the regulatory reporting, the LDR, etc. So from that perspective, we set the structure of the risk and indeed then the consequential claim. So you could extend and send more data if your business partner the other side wanted, but you've now got a data model on which to pin it.
Thank you. Just a follow-up. So in the simplest point, so if I say country of loss, for example, we all agree that one data point is country of loss. Is it then to standardize it to say that everyone who has country of loss needs to spell it in English?
Ah, well, there you go. So you've
That's a step down.
hit a nail on the head, and you've just opened an absolute floodgate for anyone that's been on my on my events. So country in here, we're talking about country codes, not how you spell it. So the MRC might say the word United Kingdom. Somebody else might say UK. Somebody else might say the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But the only thing that moves in these data payloads is GB. And I name that one because the country we're sitting in at the moment has the biggest identity crisis on the planet. It cannot make its mind up what it is, but GB is the ISO code supported by the ACORD standards to use those, and therefore UK should be rejected. It's also actually from ISO a protected code so that you shouldn't use it because it's to stop Ukraine using it to avoid confusion. So you can see why we need to move to GB. Now, lots of people I imagine around the room have probably got in their databases, however they call it, the label on the tin, data we're not worried about. The code, I anticipate quite a few of you probably got UK splattered all over your systems. And that would be an absolute classic where you would need to maybe to potentially update data historically to support MI and indeed sit to those standards.
Thank you, President.
That's a takeaway for everyone.
There you go. Those aren't mistake codes.
And I'm sort of loving the idea of data splatted.
Yeah, it's pretty well like that.
Do you have any more questions?
I work in the company I work for, I work in the regulatory reporting team. I actually found this talk really interesting because a lot of the issues we face are based on data issues. So I'm wondering, what can I take back to my company and go, this is what we should be doing to try and improve our data, and this is the companies, organisations we should be interacting more with.
I mean, I can lead an into
So the first thing I would say is get a copy of the GRLC standards for your reference list, i.e. your drop-down lists. Your biggest hurdle is actually all talking about the same thing when you move it from A to B. But even if you haven't mastered the structure or the schema or the technology or whatever underneath, the fact that you will call SCAP, whatever it's supposed to be called, or the fact that you'll use country codes is a huge hurdle to get over, and it will reduce the barrier to entry of being able to move that data. After all, you could send that data via spreadsheet, but at least you'd be able to interpret it by something the other end and understand that GB was GB, and indeed it was this data point. That's where I would always start. And once you've got that content agreed, you've then got to look at the structure, the data model. What is a section? How does a claim attach to this part of the contract? What are the different permutations I've got? And that's where I think the CDR helps a great deal, because it's that beginner's guide to walking into a full ACORD implementation.
I think one point that you made earlier as well around which one we made it, but the fact that a lot of vendor systems are actually already using ACORD standard lists within them, part of the GRLC. A lot of your companies have probably got some level of data lake, whatever you want to call it, but version of which is going to be fed by multiple systems, some of which will be using potentially a ACORD compliant list, others which won't. And so if you're then, whichever mark that you're pulling that data out from is relabeling 3 systems, UK, and then those are the things that you can start to look at internally, which don't require a ton of investment, but actually will help you start to lean into a more standardised approach, and one which the London market is trying to take via the Data Council.
Oh, yeah, I can probably extend on that. So we work with a lot of the vendors in the London market just to look at reference data. So it's in terms of maintaining the same code lists and definitions where it makes sense for them to do so. So they are the board members, they have access to our reference data. The code set seems to be a big thing for them, but it's so we already kind of halfway on that journey with a lot of your members today. To the point Kirstin was making, UK and GB. The other one that frustrates me no end, just going to have a slight moment. I work for an American company, and the dates. And to have, so that's something that's standardizing data for an interchange perspective. ACORD, well, any standard would help. Doesn't matter that Americans do dates backwards, as long as when it's shared, it's in the right format. I do all my dates in full when I'm in emails to US colleagues.
That's standardised with an S as well, I take it. Was there?
Yes.
To take that further, you've got the difference between what's in the MRC and what's in the CDR. So the MRC will put time zones in English language time zones, whereas the CDR is asking for it in UTC. So at no time now can we say at local time in Hawaii time. So you can see that there should be unequivocal. It should be actually able to go back. So at the end of the day, one might be looking at doing computer contracts where the human isn't necessarily reading the contract, and you're going to self-execute a claim based on the code that might look like English on the screen, but underneath it's like a web page. It's actually written in code. And we're never going to make that journey unless the payload, the reference lists, and the formats are all fully understood. Sorry, Tim.
I was going to add, so we've got an element of self-build. And again, internally we'll run off and come up with our own naming conventions based on historic experience, 40 plus years in the organisation. This is what we actually, let's not come up with our own naming conventions. Let's use an industry standards and make sure that we are aligned to that. And that's exactly what we've done. And it pulled everything back to make sure that it can be repurposed, reused, and understood globally.
That's the important piece. Is anyone doing any work on data at the moment, understanding it? It's mapping it back to the ACORD standards, because it's not just in London we're doing this. It's not just Blueprint 2 that's going to be picking up. Within the Ruschlikon, you'll see all of the steering committee members. These are global organisations. We're rolling this out globally. So all of your business ultimately should be mapped to the ACORD standard.
Actually, that kind of answers the question I had, which is, we're talking about the London market, the UK market, GB market, is that obviously I work for HDI Global, and we know a global business. And one of our biggest issues is rolling out software, is rolling out processes based on the local requirements, based on, regulatory requirements that absolutely differ depending on the country you're in. How is that something that both the CDR, the Ruschlikon and what are we working towards trying to make that work?
I'll take that one. So the ACORD isn't London specific. So none of GRLC is London specific. How we manage that is, so we, our working groups have representatives from across the globe, and we allow for it by putting in the validations correctly, I guess. So if you're doing business, I don't know, I'm going to pick US, because we were talking about the US earlier. A lot of their regulatory requirements are down to state. So that those sort of rules are, if it's US, then you also have to pick state. So that's how we manage it, but we need input from business practitioners to ensure that we're reflecting the correct rules within the standards. And that's where communities like Ruschlikon are really good, because they've got local implementation communities that feed that information to us.
From the CDR perspective, remember London might be talking about London market, etc., but it is a global market. So it has to cater for all of the compliance and local regulatory requirements in all of the other countries. So it's not just the insurance that's here, it's a global market in which that is feeding into London. So it does have a responsibility out globally.
More questions?
Yeah, I work in a data team at my company. This question is directed to Tim. So you said that brokers sometimes they don't place all the data on when they're loading the data because it's not a priority to them. And you said that you'll work backwards from submissions in order to kind of meet them halfway in a way and help and speed things up. Could you explain that a bit more?
So I was referring back to my time as a broker, doing the placing. So that was in context, last time I actually did placements was in 2008. So things have moved on a little bit since then. But I still think it's, I mean, we've got some brokers in the room, so we can get confirmation. What happened was the importance was on placing the contracts, getting it to your client, making sure you've got all of the cover in place. So what we would do is create a shell in our systems by either renewing the previous year's contract, or if it was a new piece of business, we'd copy a contract either from the same client or from a different client that we knew was similar. So you've suddenly got a full data set that's not accurately mapped to what's in your MRC. And you don't worry about that as a broker. Well, I didn't worry about it as a broker at the time. Certainly on some of the electronic placements now, they have to worry about that. But what we're doing is making it so even in that case, it's a broker loading up the data. By the time we get it, as carriers, we've probably loaded that data up already in our systems when we do the quote piece. So there's a difference. The Ruschlikon in placing piece, by doing it from the quote stage, means that whoever's quote's accepted, all of that contract data goes back to the broker. And as soon as they know which quote the client is accepting, they can ingest that data into their system. So they've automatically got a full data record. Then they can pass it out to all following carriers as well. So all the following carriers also get all of the contract data up front.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting question back to you. Are you on your radar in the things that you think? Do you think about extracting data from emails in order to populate systems?
But I don't think that's something we do currently. I'll have to kind of look back and see how that will be able to work out.
Because if you imagine that is effectively what Tim was experiencing there is, you've got an email or back of a fact packet, as we used to say, and you've got the fact that they've been out in the market or they've been, talking to their clients on the telephone. They've literally got a sort of skeleton set of bits of data, and the actual personalities that are a broker are not data entry clerks. They're salesmen. They're people who are wanting to do the best for their client. They're wanting to bring this through and combine with the cover. So the personalities, and we get the adoption piece of understanding the individual people in the chain and why some people will sit and never leave their PC and will just enter in lots of lovely spreadsheets and data, and some will be out in the market or out at conferences or meeting clients. And they aren't necessarily culturally the same people who will be happy to enter in lots of data.
Yeah.
So we're in no different position from 2008.
Kirstin's gone off piece and she started asking questions of the audience. This is how it's supposed to go. Do we have any further questions? I mean, I think we're close enough to say we could just call it there and do lunch. Unless you really want to hear my scripted rehearsed ones, and I think you probably don't.
No.
Okay, then, right, in which case, lunch is through those doors. Thank you very much.